Since my first cringe-inducing episodes of the Worldbuilding Dojo, back when I was a wee tot, I'd like to think I've grown. Practice makes perfect. Despite all my fancy words and lessons to impart as your sensei, I am not above reproach. In the constant quest to be the best writer I can be, I made a lot of mistakes, and I learned a lot of lessons the hard way. So, let's learn from my mistakes. I'm author DC Ferguson, and this is the Worldbuilding Dojo. Before we get started, would you like to work with me? Are you an avid reader? If so, I'd love to have you join DC Ferguson's reading group. You get the Dragon's Dream Saga totally free. All you have to do is leave an honest review on Amazon for each book for me. So, if you're able to leave reviews on Amazon and you love to read, fill out the form in the comments below and I'll get you started with Project Phoenix. I love you. The early days of planning my books, I literally went from pantsing to be one of the most in-depth plotters you'll ever meet. By the time that I was ready to sit down and write book 6 of the Dragon's Dream Saga, I realized a horrible truth. I was only 3 books from the end of the series. I needed to set all the final gears in motion and set up for the events of the final book. So, instead of starting on schedule, I took an extra week to plot out and do chapter breakdowns of books 7 and 8. I needed to step back and see what the whole picture of all 3 books were going to look like at a glance, to understand how the events of book 8 would be informed by what I was about to write. In that regard, it's a lot like a jigsaw puzzle. Before you can begin, it helps to take a look at what the picture is supposed to be when you're done. Whether you're writing a series or a standalone, always go in with a plan. There are a few things that I know about myself. I will typically average about 3,000 words in a chapter. I don't do it on purpose, and sometimes I can be much longer in big action or fight scenes, but usually that's where I land. It feels right, not too long, not too short. With that in mind, if I write down a chapter breakdown that tells my story in 24 chapters, I know the word count on the book is about 72,000 words. That's right about average, or maybe just a little under average for my genre, which is urban fantasy. As I'm sure you guessed, genres differ wildly. But as a general rule, sci-fi clocks in at around 80 to 100,000 words, as does high fantasy. And at the bottom of the totem pole is erotica, around 55,000. Well, what the hell does that tell us? Believe it or not, it says a lot. If we divide by 3 against our word count, we can get a feel for where Act 1, 2, and 3 spots are. For me, writing 24 chapters at 3,000 words a chapter means I should have the hero committed to their action around chapter 8. The drop of the story will be around chapter 16. Keep in mind, this isn't math. You're still going to go for what feels right. Chapters will still get removed, condensed, new ones get added as you go, although not that often, and we'll talk about that in a second. You may have an Act 1 that goes a little while before it gets moving, and you could have a short second act. By and large, your story will be about even, though. So I'm just mentioning this as a guideline for the planning phases. Know the story that you want to tell, map it out, then start writing. And for the love of all that is holy, stick to your chapter breakdown as closely as you can. If you plotted it correctly from the start, then you already know all the major events of a chapter, so you want to go in and hit those points and keep it moving. What you do not want to do is suddenly find that you have a side character so interesting or fun to write that you decide to incorporate an entire new subplot. I mean, you can do that, but you'll have to revise your entire breakdown and then make sure the story accommodates for it. Trust me, you can't pretend that a subplot stands on its own to just be tacked on to an existing story. There's a reason that we use a spoon to stir ingredients when we're cooking. We want every ingredient integrated the whole way through. Next up, here's another stupid thing that I didn't do that made a lot of work for me. When you sit down to start writing, create a character Bible. In this Bible, include everything you mention about major characters. Their hairstyle, the color of their eyes, complexion, height, weight, middle name, heritage, whatever you felt was relevant to mention in the book, put it in the Bible. Why? Because when I was writing book 8, I was chugging along, writing this one chapter, and a major character that's been in every single book since book 3. I forgot his stupid eye color. You know what I had to do? Open up book 3 and go looking for my own description of the character. Do you know how lame it is to have to use your own book as a reference? So, keep a character Bible handy with all the details of every major character. You can do that in like Excel or anything. It doesn't need to be very specific. It just needs to work for you. So, now that we're done planning, let's talk about the dumb things I did while writing the books. The first thing I'll have you do is check this out. Let's take a long look and break down what we're looking at. We have a couple of major writing problems here that you may or may not have ever heard of. The first one is a burly detective. Because we're afraid of word repetition, or just to mix up our prose a little, we've given a different moniker to our main character every time they speak. This is a big no-no. If you're going to refer to your character as anything except their name, pick one and stick with it. Calling them by something else and rotating it frequently isn't changing things up. It's actually making it hard for your reader to identify who's talking. Now, the next problem is we're breaking up our dialogue in much the same way. We're conveying emotion in every quote. This is telling, not showing. I'm telling you that a character feels a certain way instead of illustrating their emotions through things like body language. And that brings us to the first thing we're going to discuss, and that's invisible words. Said, for example, is an invisible word. What that means is that you're reading a story, you'll pass right over the word said. It registers, you understand what the character said in the line of dialogue, but you move on. Replied is another semi-invisible word. You can use these two words literally for 90% of the dialogue in your story and no one would notice. If a conversation is panted, yelled, screamed, heaved, moaned, groaned, whined, squealed, and growled, your reader's going to notice that. Likely, really notice that. These descriptors cause the reader to slow down through dialogue. That may or may not be a good thing, but with me being as dialogue-centric a writer as I am, I prefer people moving through my conversations like they're listening to two people talking in their head. I want to keep the tempo of a conversation going so it feels real. So, use lots of invisible words. The other side of that coin is neon words. Most of these are 50-cent words, but there's some exceptions. This is a handy little tool that I used when I started out. This is called the Hemingway Editor. It's a website, hemingwayeditor.com, where you can paste in text. It looks for a few different things. Long and complicated sentences, which I don't stress about too much. Just understand half the time they're right, and you probably could have found a less wordy way to say your sentence, or possibly even broken it up in two. The next thing that it looks for is adverbs, flagging every single word ending in ly, and it targets you for a certain minimum. Some authors say that minimum should always be 0. Most readers I've spoken with, and what I've come to learn, is that some number are okay. The truth is, there's only so many times that you can use phrases like moved with haste before you realize quickly is simpler. If you're learning to use adverbs too much and use them like a crutch, that's a sign you might actually be using adverbs as shortcuts for description. Maybe they aren't moving with haste, or they're moving quickly. Maybe they're pumping their legs in a sprint for their lives. Another thing that you need to look for is qualifiers. This is something that it also flags. These are words like just and almost. Again, this is a situation where neon words stand out. Maybe not to you, but to your reader. As it would turn out, I actually found that I use the word just an incredibly frequent amount. I'm just going to the store. It's just that I don't like it. I just have to get back from the store. I just need some rest. The truth is, the sentences are fine without the word there. I just happen to use the word a lot in my own speech, and it comes out in my writing. Be mindful of words like these. overuse of a 50-cent word or a qualifier are equally bad. They stick out like sore thumbs. So I don't confuse you. If you're using a scientific term in a sci-fi book, like ion propulsion or singularity, or a made-up name for your people in a fantasy book, like hobbits, it's fine and good to use this as frequently as the story requires. It's actually the way that you turn a phrase with normal words that you can't allow to get beaten to death. Take, for example, the very authory word juxtaposition. We can use it once, maybe twice, in a whole book. It's one of those neon words that just sticks out if you use it too much. Like a record skipping, your mind can get stuck on the turn of a phrase, such as fighting with everything that she had, and then 2 paragraphs later, holding back with everything that she had. What I find to be very helpful nowadays is that when I sit down to write, the first thing I do is reread my previous night's work. Not only will you catch mistakes like repeated and neon words, but it'll also help you get back to the space your writing was in. My early books, primarily because they featured a team, also had some serious perspective issues. Every now and again, I'd include the thoughts or feelings of a character that wasn't the main character. The best advice I have for fixing that is to watch this video on perspective and never ever forget the lessons. Writing from one consistent perspective isn't just good writing and storytelling. It's less jarring for your intended audience. So, the next thing that I have to mention comes when the writing is done. Or, well, when you think the writing is done. Because it isn't. So, now it's time to edit our work. Or what Big Trouble in Little China was talking about when they referred to the hell of the upside down sinners. Nah, I'm just kidding. Editing isn't so bad. You look at your work, you find all the mistakes and where you could have phrased something better, call yourself curse words and expletives, cry for a little bit, and then go back and do it all over again until you reach the words "the end" a second time. The truth is, no person is capable of completing a book on their own. There are patterns in your writing that make seeing things objectively impossible. You will miss stuff. Your opinion of what you meant to say in the writing may supersede what's on the page. These are the kinds of things that beta readers and editors will point out to you. Additionally, this is the original cover of The Singer and the Charlatan. This was the new one. And this is what your typical comedy series looks like. So, the first one I did myself. That was dumb. The second was a professional artist, and while she perfectly captured the characters, and it is absolutely gorgeous, it also doesn't look like other books in the genre. One glance at this and you'd think classic traditional fantasy, which it is not. So, the relaunch of the Wicked Instruments series is my next project. I'm rewriting it and getting new covers. Now, I don't really get too much into the business of writing here on the channel because there are far better people to tell you all about that, and they're probably much more successful than I am. But I'm working under some limitations, and if you have some of the problems that I do, then maybe this will help you. So, not to get too personal about the Master of Kung Fu and friendship, but I'm an extraordinary introvert, and I'm on the spectrum. The reason I know so much about storytelling is that I hyper-focus on it. I've been studying it since I was a child. Some people like me are math savants, others engineering. When I zero in on patterns, the ones I see are in stories. From our ancient bros to modern blockbusters, if it's a tale that captures the attention of others, I want to know how it works. Sometimes I get really, really into it. The thing is, though, being a person like that, I'm a little weird, awkward even. I'm riddled with social anxiety to such an extent that I've never shown my face on this channel. But speaking through the persona of your wise sensei made it work for me. And that's what my point is in bringing all this up. The truth of the matter is that I want to write for the rest of my life. At some point, I had to decide if I wanted this dream to come true more than I was afraid of the outside world. And the answer is yes. So, before the stupid pandemic messed everything up, I went to writers' conventions. Walking into a room full of strangers, especially fellow professionals, and striking up conversations, introducing myself, trying to network. I'm not exaggerating when I say it was like somebody pulled a plastic bag over my head. I couldn't see straight. I was nervous and scared. My heart was pounding. I couldn't breathe. Despite that, I walked up to established writers, shook their hands, and told them about myself. I engaged in conversation. As it turned out, there was a local group of writers that met once a month to talk shop and eat mediocre Chinese food. Like the nerdiest kid in class, I armed myself with a shoulder bag with notebooks, pens, and 2 of my books. I introduced myself to everyone in the room. I started going every month. I started asking questions about what I didn't know. I got to know people who were already ahead of me and learning the lessons they already learned the hard way. By the time the pandemic started, I was seriously considering getting my own booth at a writing convention this summer. You want to talk about petrified? I get a little bit of fear pee bearing down on me just talking about the idea of standing in one spot while hundreds of strangers come up to me, or worse, having to get their attention and make them come over to me to sell myself to them. And I was still going to do it, and I still will do it at some point. The only reason that I'm going to put myself through that is because every day that I'm faced with a situation I don't want to do, I remind myself of one thing. I want this more than I'm afraid of it. I decided to go the route of indie author, and that means every single fan I get, I have to earn myself. If someone had told me when I was first starting out that writing would be the easiest part of this, I would have chickened out. Let me tell you, the writing only ever gets easier and faster. I make fewer mistakes in my manuscript before it goes to my editor now, and I wrote The Dragon's Dream in 22 days, flat, despite having a day job. I've already accepted the fact that I'm going to be a slow burn. We're at 2,000 subs on this channel. I've never advertised it. With my books, I blew away a lot of money on Amazon advertising before I realized all the mistakes I was making. I allowed The Singer and the Charlatan to be free for 6 or 7 months to get people interested. That was idiotic. I don't know who needs to hear this, but never, ever, ever undervalue your work. You put love, blood, and sweat into that, and it's worth something. The kind of readers that you would get that don't want to pay for your work aren't ever going to become fans that pay. It's a fallacy, and don't ever let yourself believe it. Be strong and proud. I wrote this. It's awesome, and you're going to love it. It is priced competitively and worth every penny. Now buy it from me before I get my Netflix deal and you can't find it anymore. And that brings me to one last simple lesson. Be humble. You might have heard me use the words like stupid, idiotic, dum-dum. There may have even been a moron thrown in there. I am my own worst critic. It's the only way to constantly improve yourself. Be open to criticism. I'd say even go so far as to welcome it. Some people want praise for their work, and that's fine. But I can tell you that I learned more from someone doing an entire teardown of my work start to finish and giving me a 2-star rating than I could ever learn from 10 5-star reviews. Even if they're mean, and believe me, some critics are, I look for the nugget of wisdom or truth in what they're saying. Why did my work evoke this reaction from them? What could I have done to make it better? Stay humble, my friends. No one is perfect, but we can all strive to get as close as we can. Criticism, even when it's mean, is like a rock tumbler. If you let it take the chip off your shoulder, it will polish you and make you more well-rounded. Whoa, that's heavy. I better write that down. I am sure there is a bunch of other dumb stuff I've done over the years, but a lot of those lessons have become entire videos in the past. Suffice to say, even if I love teaching these lessons, I'm never done learning. You shouldn't be either. Thanks so much to all of you for the donations, you guys. This beautiful lady is Liana. She's 12 and on the spectrum. We're working with the Boston-based Needs organization to get her a service dog. If you'd like to help, check out the link in the description down below. Also, don't forget to sign up for my newsletter. The link is also in the comments, and you're going to get Cora Blake, Arcane Agent, totally free. You'll get cool news about what I'm working with on books and here on the channel, and it comes loaded with cool authors and promotions for fantasy and sci-fi. Don't forget to like and subscribe to hear about new videos, and as always, I'm DC Ferguson. Now have fun and get crafting.